Okay, some folks are starting to join. It's 6 o'clock. I'm Michael Grant. I'm co-chair of the BSA Committee on the Environment. As with just about every Zoom meeting I've been in lately, I'm going to give people a couple extra minutes just because the technology sometimes slows people up. So rather than start exactly at 6, I'd like to give people 2 or 3 minutes to get on the call. And then we'll go ahead and jump in with an introduction and start the session.
More pink than red, and I just said, well, whatever. How are you? Well, should I even ask?
Patrick, is the image of the speakers clear?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Get a little bigger there. Okay, just another quick check-in. This is Michael, the co-chair of the BSA Committee on the Environment. And I just wanted to give attendees a couple minutes before we jump in, because I know that with Zoom meetings, people are sometimes a little challenged to get everything up and running. It's about 2 minutes after. I think I'll give it another maybe minute or two, and then we'll have an intro and we'll go ahead and get started. I have to give a shout out to Tom Parks. Hi, Tom. I know you're signing in from far away. But glad to have you. Glad you could make it.
Thanks, Michael. I just had to find my mute button, but yeah. I'm in Albuquerque. Just got out of a bike ride down by the river and watching the Rio Grande dry up. So somewhat appropriate, I guess, to our topics today, I hope.
Yeah, the ride sounds great.
Yeah, it's great. It was perfect weather for it. Nothing but sunshine.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're really glad you could make it and glad you're staying in touch with Boston.
Yeah, I usually get into some BSA Zoom meeting once a week or so, or maybe every other week. But yeah, it's good to stay in touch. Thanks a lot.
Okay, I'm seeing quite a few people have joined the Zoom meeting. So I'd like to go ahead and start. I don't want to take too much of our time tonight waiting. It looks like we've got a good number of folks on. So this is Michael Grant. I'm co-chair along with Patrick Murphy of the BSA Committee on the Environment. And we have an amazing collection of speakers tonight to talk about bold new actions to curb carbon. But before we jump into that, I just have 3 quick things. The first thing I want to do is introduce the new co-chair of the BSA Committee on the Environment. That's Patrick Murphy. And Patrick is joining, he is the Director of Sustainable Design at R.G. Vanderweil, where he's an engineer and an associate principal. And so Patrick will be the interim co-chair from now through June. He's taking over from Alejandra Menchaca, the former co-chair, who did an amazing job. And I want to thank her. I'm not sure if she's on the call, but thank her for all her amazing work. So that's the first thing. Patrick's CV, if you want to learn more about Patrick, is posted now to the COAT webpage on the BSA website. So if you'd like to learn more about Patrick, you can check that out. But welcome, Patrick, and thank you for stepping up to help
Thank you,
out.
Michael. I look forward to helping you, put on a great series of events the rest of this year.
Terrific. Second thing I wanted to do was mention our next session. So on Wednesday, November 18th, we're going to have recent work by Design Lab. Most of you are familiar with Bob Miklos and his partner's work out of Boston next month, presenting at the Project Roundtable. Last thing I wanted to say is we will be posting in the chat window a link to the form that you use to give us your AIA number to get the CEU credits for tonight's session. If you would also use the chat window to mention any questions that you have, I'll take note of those, and when we get to the question period, I will sort of moderate those and choose some questions to ask. Last thing I would say is we've had a request from our speakers. If people are comfortable with it, we would love it if you would actually go live with your video feed so we can see the attendees. We just find it helps with communications. Obviously, if you prefer not to do that, that's okay. But as a preference, we would love to see everyone if you're comfortable.
But a friendly reminder, we are recording. And so if your camera is on, you may well be recorded.
Thank you, Tommy. When in doubt, maybe keep it off. All right, terrific. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. Thank you, Tommy. And then we'll go ahead and get going for tonight. I'm going to go ahead in reverse order so that Ellen won't have to be last for that. Ellen Watts is an architect and a co-founder of Architera, local architecture firm founded to advance sustainable design. Representative Tommy Vitolo is a Massachusetts state representative. Kathleen Scanlon is an architect and a principal of KMS Architects. Jacob Knowles is the Director of Sustainable Design at BR+A Engineers. And Lisa Cunningham is a partner and founder of the architecture firm Warner and Cunningham. So thank you all. We really appreciate having your expertise tonight. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Lisa and again to begin our presentation.
Thank you. And Kathleen is going to start with screen sharing. We're going to share a presentation. She's going to start with sharing her screen.
Can you guys see my screen?
I'm not seeing it yet.
Okay. All right.
I can also do it, Kathleen, if you want.
Yeah, that would be great, Lisa. Thanks.
Sure.
I'm not sure what the problem is. Okay, are you guys able to see that? Okay, great. Thank you, Michael, and to the Committee on the Environment for having us. I'm presenting with Lisa Cunningham. We're both Brookline co-petitioners for the original fossil fuel ban for Brookline. We're both town meeting members and we're both architects. Next slide, Lisa. So we're going to talk today during our part of the presentation on building decarbonization, the fossil fuel prohibition bylaw that we passed in Brookline, our work since then, which is with the Rocky Mountain Institute collaboration, and then finally legal pathways forward for municipalities, which covers all the work since that was passed in Brookline last November. Next slide. We can, decarbonize buildings by pulling 4 key levers. All electric new buildings, which is what I call low-hanging fruit in every presentation I do. Once you present the data on that, it's pretty convincing that's the way to go for any new projects. Decarbonized electricity. This is already happening at the state level. The renewable portfolio standard is mandated to increase each year, so the grid just gets cleaner and cleaner. And it's a convincing argument to go all electric because if you stay on gas, then we don't have any chance of going greener. Building retrofits, which are the most challenging out of the 4 options here, and we are not discussing tonight. And the last being embodied carbon. Next slide, please. So basically this chart shows those 4 options, all electric new construction. That even in 10 years has changed quite a bit. We have the technology and we can show cost parity in research that we can cite. So that's an easy option for new construction. And the other one would be embodied carbon I want to talk about, because the very first question we need to ask for any new project is whether new construction is actually needed. And by avoiding the use of new materials, we avoid all the impacts altogether. And building reuse and incorporation of salvaged building materials can greatly reduce the embodied carbon of construction. Next slide, Lisa. So here in Massachusetts, we've halved our carbon emissions in the electricity sector, but we've only made marginal improvements in the building sector. This chart here shows the electric power down 53% since 2005, and buildings down only 11% since 2005. Next slide. In Brookline last November, we passed what we call Warrant Article 21, Brookline's fossil fuel prohibition. And this bylaw prohibited the installation of any new fossil fuel piping for gas or for oil in buildings. And the bylaw applied to new construction and any significant rehabilitation. This was the first fossil fuel ban outside of California, so the first in a cold weather climate, and the first to include building renovations as well as new construction. We overwhelmingly approved this at Brookline's town meeting last year with a 211-3 vote. And we attribute that not only to our great team, but also to all the groundwork that was laid with previous legislation that we did in Brookline, starting all the way back with a warrant article to adopt community choice aggregation, which led to our Brookline Green Electricity Program, and requiring fossil fuel-free construction for municipal buildings. We're building a lot of schools in Brookline, so those were easy projects to get people on board to learn why it was so important. Next slide. And everything was going great. It felt like a huge win. We had done so much education and awareness. Board after board that we presented in front of became excited about us, piloting this idea and getting it out there. It felt great. We had so much support unanimously. Next slide. And then July came and the Attorney General's office decided not to uphold our implementation of Warrant Article 21. So all our wonderful press coverage and everything felt like we had to pivot and do something completely new. And so the AG's office in their brief really, were quite sympathetic with us, saying they really agreed with us on the policy side of things, but we really were preempted by the state building code, the DPU, and the gas code. And so we started to look at what it was going to have to take to get this implemented in Brookline and in other communities. And since we were the first to pass this in Brookline, we were uniquely positioned to start looking at that and working with other communities to make this something that would be passed not only unanimously in one municipality, but across the state. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and she'll go into that detail.
Thanks, Kathleen. So as everybody in the call knows, we're living in a climate emergency, but we really haven't had any movement to address our legal framework. And so We have climate goals. The UN International Panel on Climate Change has said that we have 10 years to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% in order to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. We have state goals, and we have local climate goals. Brookline has a goal of zero emissions by 2050, but we are not on track to meet those goals. And further, we don't have local, we lack local tools to meet those goals. So, and after our goal, however, in passing our bylaw in Brookline was never just to promote building electrification just in Brookline. It was to create a movement throughout Massachusetts, and as California has done throughout the country. So we did a number of outreach programs, including one with Michael and Ellen and Kathleen at the BSA in February. And we got a lot of press, and in the spring, Rocky Mountain Institute approached us and asked us to partner on a building electrification accelerator program. So we started a local partnership with RMI in April. We now have 16 towns and cities, including the ones listed here, who have joined us in this effort. And we've been running 8 monthly workshops with local and technical experts based around building electrification. So the point is to really build a movement throughout the state and put political pressure on the state. So we started our accelerator program before the Attorney General came down with her ruling. So originally the point was for all these towns and cities to follow Brookline's in their warrant article. But after the Attorney General's ruling, we realized we had to pivot with our legal strategy, and we came up with a few different ideas. We talked to lots of lawyers, did a lot of research, and we came up with a few legal pathways, which I'm about to talk about. So the first couple of paths were a non-binding resolution and a home rule petition. And a non-binding resolution calls upon, non-binding resolution calls upon the Mass State Legislature and the Department of Public Utilities and the BBRS to take actions towards building decarbonizations to meet our climate goals. And this is something that we are working on with this team of 16 towns and cities in this Rocky Mountain Institute accelerator program. So our resolution, among our demands, are that the state legislature allow municipal authority to prohibit fossil fuels in construction, and that the DPU comply with the AG's petition for a plan to transition the state away from fossil fuels. The alignment of the BBRS standards with the state decarbonization goals, which you're going to hear more about from Jacob, and the state keep equity, affordability, labor impacts, and environmental justice concerns top of mind in a just transition away from fossil fuels. And the second legal pathway that we are pursuing is that towns and cities use home rule petitions to request special authority from the state to implement laws that would be otherwise be prohibited. So our home rule petition calls on the Massachusetts State Legislature to allow Brookline to implement Warrant Article 21. The main point of these, both the resolution and the home rule petition, is to put pressure on the state legislature and to also to encourage other towns and cities to join us. We're trying to make this a coordinated effort with many municipalities to get a broader stakeholder buy-in, and again, to pressure the state. Another legal mechanism that we're looking into locally, and that many towns and cities in this program are also looking into, are zoning incentives. So the AG in her ruling specifically mentioned incentive programs as a legal path forward for Brookline and other towns and municipalities. The ideas that we are pursuing include incentives for increased FAR and increased height, reduced setbacks or reduced or no parking requirements for fossil fuel free construction, allowing single family to two family conversions or one denser zone than parcel is zoned for fossil fuel free construction. So all those are just ideas for incentivizing fossil fuel free construction. Other ideas include requiring owners to submit a cost analysis of building with fossil fuel free construction or all electric, or a life cycle cost analysis of the building. And then we also have the possibility of using fee reductions, rebates, and property tax credits as well. So those are legal pathways that we are pursuing, and we welcome your involvement if you're in one of the cities and towns that I mentioned, or even if you're not, we'd love to hear from you. Again, we're trying to put pressure on the state. We're trying to build a statewide movement, and we hope you will join us.
Hey, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Lisa and Kathleen. We are going to turn to Tommy Vitolo. Tommy, you are a co-host, so you can present your screen. And I think you're muted now, but when you're ready, you can unmute.
How we doing? There's not a lot of time and there's a lot to cover. And so thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to emphasize that this is a working document. And so just because it says it in the slide today doesn't mean that's the ultimate thinking process, right? This is a community effort to put this together, and it will iterate. But first, about me, I have a PhD in systems engineering. I've spent 10 years as an analyst and expert witness working for Synapse Energy Economics, which is to say I have testified on retiring coal-fired power plants, not building gas pipelines, constructing significant solar arrays, that sort of thing. And for the last year and change, I have been a Massachusetts state representative representing Brookline, the 15th Norfolk District. I am not an attorney. I am not an architect. I am not a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer or a PE of any kind, and I am not a lead AP. All of which is to say there's a very clear limit of how much I know, and it ain't much. And that's why I come to folks like you all to help me get the details right. So I'm expecting to file a bill in January. And first I'm going to tell you some things the bill will not do. It will not cut carbon emissions outside of buildings. That's an important thing, but this bill isn't going to do that thing. It will not require retrofitting of existing buildings. It will not restrict access to gas, heating oil, propane, or any other combustible fuel. It will not substantially increase the cost of new construction, and it will not change land use or public utility regulations. There's a lot of things other bills can and should do, but this bill will not do all things for all folks. I'm going to try to keep it somewhat narrow. But it's got 5 sections, I would say. The first is to update the base code for beneficial electrification. The second is to create a clean heating code appendix. The third is to require government agencies to adhere to that appendix. The fourth is to allow municipalities to opt in for all construction within their community of that clean heating appendix. And the fifth is to figure out how everyone else is going to get there too. And so the first portion, when I say update the base code to include beneficial electrification, what I'm talking about is both big buildings and small, residential and commercial. If you're installing a piece of equipment that combusts, and if there is an electric alternative that does the job, and we understand what that electric alternative needs, you have to include the support for that electrical alternative now. You don't have to install the electric alternative, but you have to support it. And so, for example, if it's a residential kitchen, there better be a plug behind the stove with sufficient amperage to carry an electrical oven and cooktop. Similarly, electric dryer. Similarly, electric water heater. Similarly, electric space heater. Possibly, similarly, plugs in the garage for electric charging. And maybe even solar ready. For larger buildings, it's probably more than wiring. It's also making sure that the roof can handle the load of any mechanical units that you would have put in the basement if they were combustion, but would put on the roof if they're heat pumps, for example. So that's what I'm thinking about. What I don't want to see happen is requiring expensive infrastructure now that's not likely to be useful later. And I also don't want to require inexpensive infrastructure now that would also be inexpensive to install later. The goal is to do the things now that are cheap while you're constructing, but expensive to retrofit, either in money or in disruption. That's what I'm thinking about. By getting it in the base code, we will just see it everywhere. And then 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years later, when the owner or operator of that building decides now is the time to switch to electric, we will have reduced both cost barriers and the sort of psychological and disruption barriers associated with a more complex construction project. That's the big idea for section 1. Section 2 is the creation of a clean heating code appendix. And this is inspired by, stolen from, a direct copy of the stretch energy code concept. Exactly the same idea. So we put an appendix in the code, and it lives there, and it's a standard way for folks to understand exactly what we mean when we say clean heating, just like we know exactly what is meant by stretch energy code. Now, the idea is that this is only for the things that we know how to do now. And so, for example, domestic water heating in places like hotels is actually still difficult to do with electric only. It can be done, but it's much more difficult, much more expensive in many settings. And so that's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for are the layups, the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff, the stuff that we really don't have much of an excuse not to be doing now. And I want to be clear, this is about space heating and domestic water heating. This is not covering industrial processes. This is not covering cooking. This is not covering specialty applications, right? This is narrow in the words of what it covers, but in fact, it's the vast majority of our use of combusting fossil fuels in buildings. And so we're staying out of the weeds, we're staying out of the challenging things in hospitals and biolabs. We really want to focus on the conventional 80 or 90% of the uses that we know how to deal with easily, and limiting the groups that we're going to have to persuade. So we've got this clean heating code. Who's got to abide by it? Well, first and foremost, the government needs to abide by it. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. Number one, we should be setting the moral tone for our Commonwealth. And so we ought to be doing the right thing because it's the right thing. But also, it's a good bet that this Commonwealth will continue to own the State House in 50 years. It's a good bet that they will continue to own each and every prison that they own now in 50 years. It's a good bet that they will own all sorts of buildings that they own now. The Commonwealth tends to own buildings for a long time. So we should be thinking about long-run cost minimization. And since we know that the vast majority of buildings being heated, water or space heating, with fossil fuels in Massachusetts today must be renovated by 2040, 2030, 2045, pick a year, in order to comply with the Global Warming Solutions Act, which requires an 80% emissions reduction economy-wide by 2050. We either have to do it electric now or do it gas now and rip it out in 15 years, which is going to be much more expensive since we will certainly own that building in 15 years. If you can sell it to somebody else, it's not so much a financial risk. But if you know you're going to own the building, it doesn't make sense to set yourself up for dramatic cost and disruption later if you can avoid it now. And government tends to own buildings for a long time. This would apply to all levels of government, federal, state, quasi like the MBTA, county, and municipal. And it also would therefore require that the municipalities' building inspectors be able to enforce this heating code for the relevant projects in their municipality. And there's a little bit of a concern there, and that's something that folks need to be paying attention to, but I believe it's manageable for sure. So this is the warrant Article 21 part of the presentation. So, hey, look, if we've got this clean heating code, why not let municipalities opt in, just like they can with the stretch energy code, right? We have prior art for this. We know exactly how this works. Hey, Georgia, can you throw it on mute for me? Thank you. We know exactly how this works. We know how to do it, and we know communities will be interested in doing it. The advantage of doing it this way is it will be the same clean heating code for every community that opts in. So if you're an architect, if you're an engineer, if you're a builder, if you're an inspector, you know exactly what the rules are. Just like with the stretch energy code, there are not 200 different stretch energy codes running around for compliance with the Green Communities Act. There is one, and this would give us the same benefits. And finally, right, it's not enough for the 16 communities Lisa and Kathleen mentioned earlier to do this. We know we've all got to get there eventually. We don't have to get there at the same time though. And so there's lots of different ways we might require the rest of the Commonwealth to get on board. And so it's like some possibilities are start with the easiest building types, which happen to be 1, 2, and 3 family homes. However, homeowners tend to be very politically powerful. So maybe that's not politically the right way to do it. Maybe we require green communities to opt in by a certain year to maintain their green community status. Maybe we start with the highest cost per square foot buildings first, since after all, those are the wealthiest building owners by definition, right? That might be a way to go. We might require the largest building owners assigned by wealth to do it. There's lots of different ways to do it, lots of different timelines, plenty of room for negotiation and hearing out ideas of lots of folks to do part 5. And so here's what this bill is going to do. It will avoid significant financial cost and disruption in the 2030s and 2040s for the buildings built subject to both the electrical code improvements or building electrification, I should say, improvements, and if in effect in that community or for that building, the clean heating code, right? This avoids future costs, both in terms of dollars and disruption. Because it's done through the building code, it allows for relief, right? Any project owner could apply for a variance or interpretation, just like they can now with any part of the codes, right? We have a structure and a process for that, and we would maintain that. And this bends the carbon pollution curve for buildings in a low-cost, minimally intrusive, safe, and standardized approach. This is a straightforward and consistent way to do this. I will point out that this will not result in less gas use in Massachusetts as compared to today. It would level the gas use because this doesn't reach into existing buildings. Yeah, you'll get a few renovations, maybe 1% a year, but nothing substantial. This doesn't solve all the problems even associated with fossil fuel in our buildings, but this does the easiest stuff. And importantly, as it becomes more and more common to use heat pumps for air and water, it will be more and more common for folks doing renovations, even if it's replacing in kind, to go ahead and pick up with this. So you'll get that advantage over time. So I need help. I've told you what I know about clean heating and cooling at the building level. I've told you what I know about codes at the detailed level. That's it. That's the extent of my knowledge, right? So I need help from people both engineers and architects who know this stuff inside and out, who know language around the codes, who know, in addition to maybe roof load and wiring, what other things might pick up. For example, maybe you have to reserve some space in mechanical rooms, right? That sort of thing. I don't know much about, you all do. And so I need help with the language, particularly around sections 1 and 2, the electrification codes and the clean heating codes. Because we've got to get this finished, hopefully with a variety of different organizations having read it and signing off on it by January. And the reason is January is the beginning of the session. That's when all bills that are timely filed must be submitted. And we want, if we want this to pass, we want folks like AIA to be supportive. We want environmental organizations to be supportive. We want the building trades to be supportive. That doesn't come for free. That comes with conversation. And we can't have that conversation until we have more than this PowerPoint slide. So, the call is for help. If you're interested, this is probably the best order of ways to communicate directly with me. You can call me, you can email me at the State House. I have a website, I certainly have a Twitter account. But if this is interesting to you and you can be of any help to me in getting this polished up by January, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
That's great. Tommy, can you leave that for just 1 second? So folks with cell phones handy can snap that, or be aware that we are.
I tried. Where'd it go?
That's okay. We are recording tonight's session. So those of you who are able to help Tommy with this, and this is a great opportunity, you can snap a picture of this, or you can go to the recording that we'll post. And there are some real experts on the line, Tommy, and I hope that they will be able to help you with what you're doing. And certainly also everyone help to support the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Vitolo. Next section is Jacob Knowles from BR+A. Jacob, you can share your screen and unmute when you're ready. Oh, and while he's doing that, if folks want to submit questions during the presentations, go ahead and put those into the chat and we'll revisit them in the question period.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right,
And you can see your presentation.
All right, great. So I'm Jacob Knowles. I'm the Director of Sustainable Design at BR+A Consulting Engineers. I think I know almost every one of you, so it's good to see everybody here. So I'm going to present tonight on an overview of the Massachusetts Energy Zero, or EZ, stretch code proposal that's been submitted to the BBRS. So over a year ago, we got together with quite a few other leaders throughout the Massachusetts AEC industry and said, we need a stretch code that meets our carbon neutral goals, that is a net zero stretch code. And so roughly 100 firms and 1,500 professionals signed on to a support letter that we presented to the BBRS. It was in 7-point font and it was 20 feet long. And they didn't like it, but we did. And we're really passionate about the need for a net zero code to push to our sustainable future. So the BBRS said, we don't need your prop, take it away. What we need is a proposal, show us a code. And we said, all right, we'll take that. We'll take that on. And so we got together this incredible team of experts to actually write a net zero code. And collaborated with some amazing organizations in the process. And so a little context, you all know this, so I'll go through this quickly. Governor Baker is pushing us even faster than the Global Warming Solutions Act towards carbon neutral by 2050 for the entire economy of our state. Buildings matter, as we know. Net zero is our pathway to addressing buildings. Heat pumps have lower emissions than boilers, and it's only going to get lower on the electric heat pump side. Electric vehicles have lower emissions. The grid keeps getting cleaner. And there are precedents for net zero codes. So this is happening in Seattle, Vancouver, California, Washington, D.C. We're not the only ones out here pushing on progressive codes. So let's take our stretch code, which is almost every town and city in the Commonwealth, and get it on the timeline to net zero. So everybody probably knows by now, November 7th, will now be mandatory in the revised version of the 9th edition code. So for example, the envelope U-value backstop calculation will be mandatory on that date. But we're really focused on that January 2022 timeline to push us to the next version of the code. Will that be a net zero code? We're not sure yet, but that's our goal. All right, so here's a summary of the EZ code. There's a reason we call it the EZ code, because it's supposed to be easy, right? It's just a series of simple requirements that anybody can apply in a straightforward format. It addresses 3 major topics: energy efficiency, electrification, and renewable energy. So I'm going to walk through each of those categories. Before I do that, I want to mention, what does the EZ code apply to? So there is actually, thanks to Ellen and others, an effort underway to develop a net zero stretch code for residential. But this EZ code is just focused on new commercial buildings and basically mid-rise and taller residential. So a large multifamily that's currently regulated by the commercial stretch code today. Now, some people ask, well, I thought there was another zero code. There's the AIA zero code. What's the difference? Why are you proposing something different? Well, there are some key differences. So number one, the zero code is not a stretch code. It just uses the base code as its starting point. So it doesn't actually meet the definition of a stretch code as required for the Green Communities Act. The EZ code, of course, is pushing to higher efficiency on the building performance side. Second difference is the zero code does not address combustion, whereas the EZ code is focused very much on combustion-free buildings. And then the third is on the zero code, the renewable energy does not have to meet additionality standards. So it doesn't necessarily have to be carbon neutral in terms of offsetting carbon that would have been emitted into the environment, whereas the EZ code does require that as a minimum threshold for the renewable energy. All right, so let's talk about energy efficiency. There's 2 pathways for the energy efficiency section. The first pathway is the prescriptive path. And that's really where the EZ code got its name, is to say, what if you didn't have to do an energy model to show compliance with the stretch code? Hey, we make lots of money doing energy modeling. Why would I be doing that? Well, because you put something in an energy model and you don't always get the exact same answer depending on who's doing the model. So I think it'd be a lot smarter to have a more simple prescriptive pathway. It does require certain performance around specific elements of the building, like the envelope and air leakage and energy recovery. So comparing the IECC 2021 on the right to the EZ prescriptive path, you can see we're addressing the heat loss through the envelope through setting a BTU limit per square foot. We are making the fenestration, the windows, better performance, so moving towards a triple glazed system, basically. And tightening up the air infiltration, improving the energy recovery efficiency, and also mandating a minimum capacity of heat pumps to be installed. And finally, dealing with service water heating and setting minimum efficiencies there. So there's really just 2 of these tonight that I want to highlight. One is the envelope, and the other is the energy recovery efficiency. So if you take a typical 90,000 square foot, 3-story office building, and you're going to comply prescriptively with the IECC 2021, you're going to have a window to wall ratio of 40%. You're going to have a U value of 0.38 on the windows, an R18 wall, and an R30 roof. Well, let's see how crazy we got with the EZ code. Must be pretty crazy, right? Nope, not that crazy. We basically figured, okay, that window to wall ratio and the wall and roof value are actually pretty good. The problem is the windows, right? We're using this dinosaur system of double glazing. You go to Europe, you can't even buy it anymore. We just need to make the leap and do better for our windows. And that actually gets you to a very low heating load per square foot for the space in the building. The other big driver is ventilation. That's the other big driver of fossil fuel demand in buildings. So the code is insane, insanely low, 50% energy recovery effectiveness. There are literally products out there that do 95% effective heat recovery. Why is the code 50%? So all we did was boost that up to 80%. There's multiple technologies out there that can get you to that level of effectiveness. And it essentially means that you don't need to heat your ventilation air. If you think about how much ventilation each person needs, their body heat can warm the air up the last few degrees that you need once you've got heat recovery that's this effective. It's pretty big game changer in terms of eliminating the need for fossil fuels in buildings. That ultimately gets us, those two things basically get us to a 50% reduction in peak heating load compared to the IECC 2021. This is easy to do, cost effective, no-brainer stuff, just like Tommy was describing with his electrical legislation. All right, now we still allow people to do a performance path. Give people options, they're happy, right? So all we did was match up with the AIA 0 code as far as the performance path goes, which references ASHRAE 90.1 2016. Now, here is the history of ASHRAE 90.1 over time. Back in 1980, if that was 100 units of energy in your building, how much less would you use if you met the newer versions of the code? So this is this, step-by-step process of tightening the efficiency of buildings. And here's the Massachusetts stretch code in orange. And you can see it used to be 20% reduction. Now it's only 10% reduction. And it's also typically adopted far after the previous version of ASHRAE 90.1 was released. So you can see if you look at the kind of the line going across your screen of reducing energy, sadly, the stretch code is really not doing much for us. Well, the AIA 0 code says, let's use ASHRAE 90.1 as our basis for the energy efficiency of the building. And the ASHRAE 90.1 2016 and also the 2019 that will be published is looking back at ASHRAE 90.1 2004 as the baseline and saying, we're going to stop changing the baseline so everybody can have some sanity in their energy modeling. We're going to keep the baseline the same forever, and we're just going to ratchet down how much of that energy you can consume. And so the challenge, though, is you've now not reduced your consumption compared to the code minimum. And the other is you've created this huge range of variability. The further back you go with your baseline and the more percent savings you have to achieve, the more error there is essentially in your error band around the actual performance of the building. So I think that's fine. ASHRAE 9.1 2016 is, pretty decent performance if you follow it exactly. But we figured we better have just a little safety net on this performance path. And so we added a prescriptive backstop to the performance path and said, all right, we're going to loosen up the restrictions in all these categories, but only so far. So you can't go too bad on heat recovery. You can't go too bad on the envelope to make sure that you don't go off the rails. All right, electrification is the next major section. It's very similar to the Brookline gas ban. It has a lot of exceptions, right? Brookline was adopted because it didn't cross the line on all these challenging areas like labs and healthcare and so forth. So these are all things that you don't have to do all electric in the EZ code. And in terms of heating, the big difference here is if you do the current code or the 2021 IECC and you try to mandate all electric, you're going to have a lot of heat pumps. doesn't really make sense to have a high load building and not take advantage of load reduction. So what we're saying with the easy code is reduce the load first. That makes the amount of heat pumps very manageable. And the other great thing about it is when people say, oh, you're going to melt down the grid, we can't possibly electrify our buildings. The cool thing about this is your peak electrical load under the easy code will be in your cooling mode, just like it is today. Building peak electrical is in the summer, right? You hear about that peak demand day on a hot summer day. Well, the easy code makes sure that even when you run your building on heat pumps in the winter, that peak electrical load in winter will be less than your peak electrical load in summer. So you're not going to add any demand to the grid relative to another high performance building that had a gas boiler. So that concern goes away. Now, electrification of transportation is another
Somebody
key issue.
should mute. Thank you.
We know Governor Baker is anticipating 600,000 electric vehicles in Massachusetts by 2025. So we absolutely need the infrastructure to support that. So the easy code addresses minimum requirements for vehicle charging stations. The next big category is renewable energy. Simple enough, right? You got to offset your consumption. You can use both on-site and off-site renewables to get there. We have a minimum requirement for solar in terms of coverage on roofs and canopies. And we also require certain mandatory thresholds to say you need to really meet additionality. This renewable energy has to be a true carbon reduction in the environment. And so we've specified some rules around that. So that is the overview. There's one last big category that's an optional category that jurisdictions can opt into, and it addresses things like life cycle embodied carbon of the embodied carbon of the building structure itself. Does not require a reduction. It just says you have to calculate it and submit that as part of your documentation for permit. Same thing with refrigerants. It doesn't mandate a reduction in refrigerant global warming potential, but you do have to calculate it. And then there's also post-occupancy commissioning, benchmarking, and disclosure and recommissioning. So really, this whole jurisdictional piece is about you can't manage what you don't measure. Thank you.
All right, that was great. Thank you very much, Jacob. And we're going to switch to Ellen. Jacob, a question that I'll have in the question period is, where are you in the process of getting that made into an actual code that people will follow? But we'll save that for the questions. Next is Ellen Watts from Architera. And Ellen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. How y'all doing? I can't say enough how inspired I am, Jacob, by your work on the easy code, Tommy, by your work on the clean heating bill, Lisa and Kathleen, your incredible work in Brookline, and now the Rocky Mountain Institute Building Electrification Accelerator. And Michael and Patrick, thank you for what you're doing to keep the code programming so strong. I should start the way Tommy did and say what I'm not. I'm not a lawyer. I am not a code expert. I'm not a climate scientist, but I am an architect and I am a planner and I now am an advocate. I want to say I was crushed when the Attorney General's decision came out about Brookline. I tried not to let it show because I didn't want to upset Kathleen and Diane and Lisa and Jesse too badly. And it had a very minor role in seeing that incredible effort, which went from no way to hell yes in 40 meetings in 4 months. That's all it took, 40 meetings in 4 months to go from no way to hell yes. And I further was spurred to think about bold new actions, which is the title of this program, when a member of my community, I've lived in the same town in Metro West for over 25 years, literally said about a proposed project of significant impact, sustainability is bullshit. We are in the year 2020. I have devoted my career to this mission, thinking, oh, one building at a time, we'll build some precedents and show how financially attractive it is. And this is going to catch on like wildfire. when we wake up, wherever you are, and I know a lot of you, so I know a lot of you are architects and design professionals, but wherever you are, whatever you do, and whatever you're doing about climate change right now, it is not enough. And we should be getting up every single morning with that thought, it's not enough. And you know what? I have found it somewhat easier than I thought to do more. And I don't mean to say that writing building code amendments is easy. Most people would rather pull out their fingernails than reform their zoning code or come up with a home rule petition. I mean, again, we're designers, right? But that's the point. We're designers. We're also instinctively communicators, because you know what? You can't build anything you design unless you can communicate pretty well. And so by the time you get advanced in your career, you have stood up thousands of times in front of unwilling audiences and persuaded them to part with mega bucks to do things that are damn difficult, and they get done. So I do want to encourage everybody to think this thought that whatever you're doing, you should do more. It should be a whole lot bolder. We need multitudes of people doing a multiplicity of actions. And that's not to just see what sticks. And it's not meant to be flip. But as Jacob was sort of teasing out here, each one of these actions addresses different things. New construction, renovation, commercial, residential, big projects, little projects. I mean, the stretch code, the stretch energy code was originally written, and I know, Jacob, you and your colleagues are trying to change this, but for projects 100,000 square feet and higher, that leaves a lot of square feet behind. And we must leave no square feet behind in this current environment. The climate crisis is very, very threatening, and the trend data is very, very bad. So I don't mean to say that I'm not without a lot of optimism, but I was at a climate adaptation forum presentation just a week ago, and I learned by some very good Yale research that most people think the climate crisis is caused by plastics. Yeah, plastics. They therefore think that the solution has to do with recycling. I mean, it's just too hard to explain emissions, I guess. And therefore, if you hit a whole lot of people with a proposal for revising the energy code or the zoning code, it might need some education. So that's the last thing I'll say preliminarily is this is all about education. It really is. I saw that in Brookline. The Brookline core team did incredible research and then shared it. And education is the best persuasion. It really, really is. So some things to think about. Lisa and Kathleen talked about the RMI accelerator, and I hope if you're in a community that's not already participating, you will join that. Tommy asked for help with his legislation. I want to volunteer. I hope there'll be others on this call that will help. And Jacob needs help getting that easy code adopted as a stretch code. And there are BBRS speaking opportunities coming right up. I believe it's November 17th for that hearing. Maybe Jacob, you can put the details in the chat. I want to raise 3 more ideas in just a few minutes. Number 1, about the profession at large. Number 2, about green communities. You are probably in one, even if you don't know it. And third is about zoning reform. Lisa talked about zoning incentives. I want to talk about some complementary ideas that have just to do with reforming zoning codes. So first thing about the profession, architects are in the best position ever to argue with clients. And well, why is that? I mean, I came of age in this profession when it was still called a gentleman's profession. I mean, we'll leave aside the gender bias of that typecast, but you were not supposed to argue with your clients. As a young associate, I was told, don't bring that up. I said, what do you mean? I'm just asking where north is. Don't bring up sustainability unless it's asked for. Well, if you don't already know, the National AIA, in a remarkable vote that was nearly 20-1, adopted a resolution for urgent and sustained climate action at its national convention in June 2019. Building on that, the National AIA adopted a framework for design excellence, which are the 10 criteria lifted from the top 10 green building program that started over 20 years ago. So this is an easy thing we can all espouse and should all know that these 10 criteria, which used to be esoteric and only evoked for sustainability awards, are now the defining standard for design excellence for our entire profession. And bringing it home locally, the Boston Society of Architects has recently restored its policy advocacy committee, meeting now bi-weekly and writing a plethora of letters on all kinds of issues, particularly climate. And along with that, the BSA board has adopted 7 principles for policy advocacy, starting with the top 3 in Jacob's Easy Code: building electrification, energy efficiency, and renewables. So we want to all stand together and fortify one another in talking with our clients, not argumentatively, of course, but educationally, and spurring all of those principles into action. Green communities, little history on this. At the Northeast Sustainable Energy Conference in 2007, I remember it well, then Governor Deval Patrick got up and said, you know, folks, we've got to get to zero. We've got to get all the way to zero. And I thought, what is he talking about, getting to zero? We've got to become carbon neutral by 2030, he said. I mean, this was flabbergasting. And what quickly happened was the legislature passed the Global Warming Solutions Act and offered communities to self-elect to become green communities and thereby, among other things, compete for state incentives, but also adopt the default standard of the Stretch Energy Code. Today, 284 communities, representing nearly 90% of the state's population, are green communities. But as Jacob explained, the stretch code is no longer stretchy, and the green communities more often compete for scarce state dollars than they stand united. This is a moment when I believe green communities can stand united before BBRS, before the state legislature, and before any other folks you might care to mention might be in a position to help make this change. And I think it could build on the idea of the Rocky Mountain Institute Accelerator, which has already drawn together 16 cities and towns, stretching from Brookline and Cambridge to Worcester. This will amplify the work of a lot of another thing I want to mention. There are amazing organizations at work in this collective action mode, but I think the Green Communities Collective could be another one of those. I'm talking about the NEEP, MCANs, MAPCs, Sierra Club, USGBC, the BSA, and of course, Mothers Out Front organizations. Finally, back to my shock at having anybody in the year 2020 say sustainability is bullshit. This was a project of significant impact in a community I otherwise am proud to live in. I think it's actually quite progressive. It was among the first to inventory greenhouse gas emissions, adopt an opt-out renewable energy program with its own municipal light plant, and set net zero performance guidelines for all of its municipal buildings. So I was pretty sure that this offhand, rather curt comment would be remedied by the subsequent review process of this project of significant impact, only to find out in 80 pages of this project of significant impact report, there was no mention of energy performance, nor mechanical systems, nor building envelope, nor even one hint at emissions. And when I dug through the zoning code, you might try this yourselves if you're ever disappointed in a project review process, see what's in your zoning code and educate yourself about how little leverage your community may or may not have. In the case of my town, it was far less than I would have wanted. And in fact, subsequent interviews with the planning director and design review board committee members assured me that the zoning code was quite tame. Now, why is this important? municipalities legally have a lot of discretion to regulate themselves regarding land use and project review to protect public health, safety, and welfare. So little tweaks requiring different submission materials and requiring public information disclosure and impact analysis, options assessments, comparison with municipal guidelines, for examples, are innocuous enough, not a big ask, and not directing performance in a way that would ever be challenged by the Attorney General as competing with the building code. So these are wonderful, wonderful tools. Additionally, if you've got anything in your zoning code requiring a special permit for non-conformance with dimensional requirements, or a special permit required for, in our town, a project of significant impact, meaning it's big and it's going to draw heavily on municipal systems. And also we might add cause considerable concern about carbon emissions. You can require performance. You can require performance consistent with standards that you might mandate, for example, for municipal buildings. So these are some of the ideas that we are working at. I want to say two other things that are popular ideas is to implement high performance requirements in overlay districts. Our town is probably too small for that, but I would say even if you live in a large city, overlay districts leave a lot of square feet behind. And back to my earlier theme, we can leave no square feet behind. We do not have time, I think, to regulate special district by special district. We need to try to catch all of it as much as we can. And then a thought about incentives. You know, if you incentivize with some of the ideas that Lisa threw out, you know, reduction of property taxes or, you know, lower fee schedules for building permits and things like that, that might be fine. But at least my colleagues and I in our town are wary of awarding density bonuses or parking relaxation because of our fear of increasing density and traffic, as will just compound the problem of emissions. So my last pitch is if really reforming your zoning code or even standing before the BBRS with a whole bunch of other green communities would really set your nerves on edge or be otherwise really anathema to what your outlook is, think about serving to enforce all of these codes. You know, think about serving in some capacity, design review board, planning board, a permanent building committee in your own code. I saw in Brookline for myself how instrumental architects were both presenting before town committees and also being the core committee. So I urge your active participation. And thank you all for being here tonight.
Everyone's muted, so we can see but not hear the applause. So I hope I'm unmuted. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you to all the speakers. It is almost 10 after. I'd like to open it up for questions, and I'm going to reiterate to the audience that if you could just type any questions you have into the chat window, then I will relay them to the speakers, and the speakers may see them themselves and they can jump in. And while I'm waiting for questions to pop up, I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple myself, and I would encourage if the speakers or Patrick, if you have any, that you might join me in generating some questions. So the first one I have is for you, Ellen, since your presentation is fresh on my mind. The idea of opening up your local zoning code and looking at it as a design professional and seeing if it could be improved is fantastic. What is the typical process? Let's say you got together with a few other design professionals in your town and you did a good look at it and you came up with some priorities. What is the process to take that from your kitchen table to a change in the zoning rules?
Well,
I will tell you that the answer depends dramatically on whether or not you are a city or a town.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so you got to know how your local government works. And so for a city, there's a city council or something like that. And it's a much more direct process for a town. You know, your town is going to have a town meeting, whether you're representative or open, and you would file a warrant article. But, you know, anyone can file a warrant article. It takes a lot more work to file a good warrant article that is likely to pass. And so this is like the art of local politics and legislating, which is probably beyond the scope of today's conversation. But understand it is a ton of work to win. It's easy to put in a little bit of work and lose.
Well,
Yeah.
Tommy, maybe I'll trade you I'll help you on your clean energy bill if you'll give me some coaching. But
Happy
you know, what we've really talked about, Michael, is building outward. First of all, from my first run at marking up our zoning code with things I would like to see, I was astounded that there were, for example, 3 pages about what to do about bicycles, but there wasn't a single sentence about energy. I mean, I can rebalance that pretty well myself as a first draft, but step number one.
As a bicyclist, the bicycling stuff isn't very good either.
Maybe that needs to be tweaked too. But step number one is to build a core committee that's going to work on this. So, you know, there's now a Google Docs that's being shared, and it's springboarding off the work of the Rocky Mountain Institute Accelerator team. We're talking every week anyway. Lisa Cunningham is our coach. She's joining us. And we figured this is something we could do in addition to what the Rocky Mountain Institute is spurring us on to do. And by the way, it is one of the recommended legal pathways. Number 2, we've already had preliminary conversations with our planning director and the chair of the planning board, who were wildly enthusiastic about this. I mean, honest to God, they knew that our zoning code was very, let's call it, not deficient, but lame. And yet they do not have time. They have too many scheduled meetings. So they were just thrilled that here was a group of citizens, some of whom know somewhat about building performance and building energy, although are not code consultants. So now they're on our team. Next, we plan to take a lesson from one of the towns that we heard from during the Rocky Mountain Institute Accelerator conversations, mournful stories about how they got all the way to town meeting with their warrant article. Tommy, you'll love this. And then they missed the vote. You know, they needed a 2/3 majority. They missed the vote. And what they really missed was their own planning board voted against it 8-1. The only one vote yay was the husband of the wife who spearheaded the zoning reform. So, you know, there are all these wacky stories that have really good lessons that we all need to bear in mind. But ultimately, our town would have to submit a warrant article and have a town meeting vote. But we hope by then, with our educational rollout, every single town employee, every single board, every single outspoken town meeting member in each precinct would have such a good feel for it, and mostly see how truly deficient our zoning code is today to even have any standing to question projects of significant impact. If that person hadn't been so crude and dismissive, I might have never opened that zoning code yet. It takes getting angry sometimes to do anything. So I also want to say sometimes being disappointed, as I know Brookline was, and I felt, is a good boomerang to take even more action.
Yeah, definitely. What I take from what you're saying is, look, if you're interested in this, first get some friends, get some other design professionals in your town, because it's hard. Think of it as a long-term thing and contact the zoning board. The chair of the zoning board may want to be your first stop. They can answer a lot of the questions about what you're going to need to do. But also it's clear from what you say, Ellen, that you need to make this a collaborative effort with that board. And like a lot of political things, you should know what the vote's going to be before you go into that meeting. Or maybe you're not ready yet.
Michael, I just wanted to add something. I'm also working with the Rocky Mountain Institute, and We're finding that some cities are already proactively going to be fine tuning for zoning incentives, especially around this issue of fossil fuel free construction, because they realize they just don't have a lot of other tools available to them to demand it. And so I've had a couple of conversations with other cities that are looking into that for the spring.
That's great, Kathleen. Thank you. So I'm not seeing questions come up. If you guys want to shut me up, just send me questions. But so I'm going to go to my other question that I mentioned, Jacob. Jacob, could you give us an update on where you are in the legislative process relative to the Easy Code?
Yeah, so in terms of legislation, the House and Senate both support, I think, or at least the House does, a net zero code. There's been some advocacy around the conference committee that's now reviewing both the House and Senate bills. I did hear earlier today, though, that there's rumblings that the conference committee will not be making a bill. They won't be, promulgating the bill at the end of this year. After 2 years of working on a climate bill, it may die. That is really sad news. So I don't know if Tommy has more details on that, but that's on the legislative side. On the BBRS side, we submitted the Easy Code much earlier this year, and they've been reviewing both the Zero Code from AIA as well as the Easy Code. They send it down to the Energy Advisory Committee that works under them for review. But they sent the Easy Code down to the EAC with basically a downvote saying, we don't support the Easy Code, but you can look at it anyway. And so basically the EAC has been like, well, they said they don't like it, so it's kind of on the back burner. So the front burner then is the Zero Code proposal. And the EAC has said, well, we think it's too expensive and not implementable. That's basically their recommendation up to the BBRS. So even the vanilla Zero Code is already catching flack, and ours isn't even really being considered officially. So it's just abominable how backwards and painful this whole process is. But we're going to resubmit the Easy Code again before November 10th, which is the next public hearing, with some updates and enhancements, including a passive house compliance pathway, which is a no-brainer. And we're just going to keep pushing on them. We've submitted letters from cities and towns all around the state. We've submitted support from professional organizations. What we're really trying to get now is the AIA Massachusetts Government Affairs Committee to put their support behind it. And the BSA and AIA Western Mass have voiced their support. We're trying to get a meeting together with the Central Mass Board to get their support. If we're able to get that, then I think that's a big impact, because John Nunnery in some ways has the ear of the BBRS more than any of us, as sort of a professional advisor. And if the directive from AIA Mass and the Government Affairs Committee is that we support the Easy Code as a better, more progressive solution than the Zero Code, that has some weight, that maybe at least they'll officially review it as opposed to just poo-pooing it. So the other thing that's actually happening, though, all of that is kind of like the big theatrical process. The thing that's actually happening is the DOER has hired us and a number of other consultants as a team to do all of the detailed, rigorous analysis and put together a proposal for a net zero code from the DOER that then may be the compromise solution that actually gets approved, we hope. So a lot of this is I don't want to kind of give away too much, but I figure we're among friends here. A lot of this stuff is paving the landing strip for the DOER code proposal. And so we'll see how that all goes, but we're hoping that's our safe landing.
I see.
So happy to just chime in on the conference committee. And what I will assert is that I know exactly as much as everyone else here knows, which really is nothing. There's nothing that is knowable. It is extremely unlikely that anything will come out before November 3rd. there's a couple of things going on that day. One of them you might have heard is an election. Make a plan to vote. And there's other conference bills that would probably come out before the climate bill from a chronological point of view. There's no reason to think we will get one or we won't get one, or this will be in it or that will be in it. It really is, it's not random, but it is not knowable unless you're one of the 6 people on the committee. And one of the prerequisites to being on that committee is you know how to keep your mouth closed. Because if you're trying to negotiate a deal, if anybody's talking to somebody else, the deal falls apart, right? That's sensible. Sure. So I don't know. Whoever told Jacob doesn't know either. And that's not optimistic or pessimistic. It just.
Sure, it's in the works. Okay, we have a lot of we have a great number of attendees tonight, by the way. There's 60 people on this call, but they're all very shy. So again, if you want to shut me up, just send me a question. I had a question for Lisa and Kathleen, which is how does a non-binding resolution, which was one of the actions that's been taken by local communities since the Attorney General ruled against Brookline's so-called gas ban. How does a non-binding resolution, how does it affect the world if it's non-binding? What's the goal? What's the goal of these non-binding petitions? Or
So the goal of a non-binding petition, actually, Brookline is the first to file a resolution. We're in the process of going in front of committees, and we filed it as a warrant article. It's going to be voted on, I expect extremely favorably in our town meeting in November. But the idea behind this is to actually get all the towns and cities, the 16 towns and cities in this accelerator program to follow us, to file their own resolutions. And the point of that is twofold. One, in the act of filing a resolution with your town or your city, you have to go through a whole educational process, as we did in Brookline, to explain to your stakeholders and constituency the importance of building electrification. So that's a really critical. What's really critical about what Brookline has done is that a lot of communities have already bought into the fact that electrification is practical, it's cost effective in the state of Massachusetts. So that's a very important concept. And then the second concept is that it's a tool to speak with your state legislatures about why we need movement at the state level. So if you've got all these towns and cities taking forward this resolution, if you've got them all talking to their state representatives, and then if you've got other towns and cities who might be recruited through the organizations that Ellen mentioned, like MCAN or Mothers Out Front, Sierra Club, 350, other organizations, then we're just hoping we really need to bring awareness. We're just running out of time, and we really need action at the state level, as everybody's highlighted tonight. So this is just an attempt to continue to bring awareness into the public arena and to push for immediate action.
And I would just add, the hearings that happen, are just a great opportunity for public input and for people to understand the nuances of how a warrant Article 21 would affect them. We get letters all the time about people who want to understand why electrification is the pathway to pursue. And sometimes it just takes that one-on-one conversation, but it's only by that public process that they're even hearing about it. So that outreach really magnifies our efforts and our impacts. The other thing I just wanted to add was that in Brookline, at least, staff, Brookline's town staff take these resolutions very seriously. And so even though it's non-binding, staff, for instance, will work very hard to implement all the things that are laid out in a resolution. And so, as petitioners, we feel good about that, and working with staff that best efforts will be made to follow, what's voted on in town meeting.
I would also like to just make a plug for people to get involved in their local government, whether it's volunteering to be on the planning board or running for town meeting. It's really important to get involved in your local government and have more of a voice in your local government, instead of petitioning somebody else to make the right vote, making the right vote yourself. So I think that that's just really, really important.
That's great. Thank you. How are we doing for time? It's 25 after. Jacob, did you want to you answered a question from the audience in the chat, but could you do that out loud? Because a lot of people may not be following the chat.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the questions that came up in the chat was, how are you working to engage the construction industry in support of a net zero code? And Built Environment Plus has been a huge advocate and player in this process in terms of bringing people together and convening, conversations around developing and supporting the net zero code. So Meredith Albaum has, she's got a lot going on, but there's one of the things on her list is to continue to offer opportunities to engage AEC industry professionals, which includes construction, in opportunities to learn about the net zero code, to learn about these issues in general, and to get their feedback and garner support and just build consensus around this initiative. So I know we've presented to some architecture firms, but also we're very interested in talking to other professionals throughout the industry.
I'd also like to add, we need to be thinking about how to build bridges to the real estate industry. And in this regard, the BSA's Electric Futures Forum that took place in early February, with Michael facilitating and many people presenting tonight, presenting then, there was a wonderful brief presentation about the Northland Newton project, which is to be in large part Passive House certified and has now cleared all of the hurdles and is moving forward into development. I saw a commercial real estate women's full-time lunchtime presentation by those developers, and it was an incredible presentation. They talked all about their land use strategy, their performance strategy, many of the details about their envelope and their HVAC systems, and answered detailed questions about cost, first cost and operating cost. And I think we need all of us on this call, if you know any development colleagues or real estate professionals of any kind who have interesting stories like that, that develop out of the marketplace, not by regulation, but by aspiration and frankly, profit motive, to bring those stories forward. At the AIA conference in New York a year ago, I heard a developer from Colorado talking about really unique models for structuring leases to share costs and profits on a solar supported building, and a net zero building. It was an office building. I think the more kinds of stories we can bring forward like that, the more we can help the educational process we've all been talking.
Okay, it is almost 7:30. The main thing I want to do before we sign off is thank the speakers. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's so appreciated. Thank you to all the attendees who've made time to come also. Please join us a month from now for Design Lab presenting one of their projects to our high performance project roundtable. And if you're looking to get the CEU credits, which we encourage everybody who needs them to get, take a look in the chat and there's a link there. I'll leave it up for another minute or so. So thank you very much. And have a great night.
Thank you, Michael, for organizing this and for having us. It was really a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for all your work on this.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Thanks, everybody.
Sure. Good night.
Have a good night.
Night, everyone.